I'm Major Willow Willis, 32 years old, a lawyer for the United States Army. I will never forget the moment at my 32nd birthday party. In front of 50 of the most powerful guests in Washington, D.C., my husband, James, slapped me so hard I fell to the floor. I tasted the salt of my own blood mixed with the bitter fizz of Dom Perignon champagne. But the most horrific part wasn't the slap. It was the words my mother-in-law, Victoria, had just whispered in his ear. A command. Remember your mission. Protect our asset. Asset. That's all I was after 5 years of marriage. They didn't know, in that moment, my soft chuckle. That was the starting pistol for their downfall. Let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever been turned on by family when money got in the way. The morning of my 32nd birthday began with a countdown clock hitting 0. I was sitting at my desk in our Arlington penthouse, the 7 a.m. sunlight glinting off the Potomac. Across the river, the Pentagon stood sharp and defined, a perfect, 5-sided symbol of order. It's where I worked. It's where I belonged. It was a world of logic, of regulations, of consequences. This place, this was not that world. This was the opposite. This was a war zone disguised as a luxury home. My screen glowed with the email I'd been waiting for. It was from the Harrington Family Trust. I scrolled past the legal jargon to the one sentence that mattered. Requires continuous marital status for no less than 5 years to satisfy the legacy provision. I checked the date on my monitor. Today, 5 years, to the day. 1,825 days of patience. 1,825 days of gathering intelligence. My fingers moved with practiced precision. I wasn't a wife, I was an operative. I encrypted the email, along with its metadata, and routed the package to a secure off-site server. A server Victoria Harrington, with all her defense contractor resources, didn't know existed. The woman who monitored her entire family couldn't monitor me. Not really. At West Point, they teach you discipline. In my advanced JAG training, they teach you the law. But in SEER school, survival, evasion, resistance, escape, they teach you how to endure. They teach you how to wear a mask while being broken, how to resist, how to wait for the one single moment to escape. My marriage had been a 5-year SEER exercise, and tonight the operation was coming to an end. The shower in the master bathroom stopped. I closed the laptop just as James walked out, a thick white towel wrapped around his waist. He was 37, a perfect specimen of Harrington DNA. His body was flawless, the kind you'd see on the cover of a men's health magazine. But his eyes were completely empty. Blank. As if the person inside had left years ago. He walked to me, his feet silent on the cold marble floor. He stopped exactly 3 feet away and recited, "Happy birthday, Willow." He leaned in and gave me the kiss he'd been programmed to deliver. It was mechanical. His lips were cool, dry, and pressed against mine for exactly 1.5 seconds. It wasn't a kiss, it was a report being filed. I responded with the trained warmth I'd perfected over 60 months. I smiled, letting my eyes crinkle just enough. "Thank you, James." Inside, I felt the familiar, bitter cold. This was the worst part of it all. The daily betrayal. Not the affairs I knew he had, those were just distractions. The real betrayal was this. The man I had fallen in love with 6 years ago, the man who was warm and a little rebellious and laughed at my military seriousness, was gone. He had been killed in action. This was just an asset, a replacement. "Mother is very excited about the party tonight," he said, his voice a smooth, pleasant monotone. He was already looking past me, toward his closet. "I am too," I lied. "Good. She wants you to wear the blue Valentino. She said it would be perfect." There it was, the first order of the day. Not from him, but through him. Willow the soldier noted the intelligence. Willow, the wife, felt the small, sharp pain of recognizing that her husband was nothing more than a high-functioning puppet. He only reacted to signals from Victoria. I needed to get to my safe room. I stood up. I'm going to get dressed. James just nodded, already selecting a tie. I walked into my walk-in closet, or, as I called it, the safe room. It was the only place in this entire 10,000 square foot penthouse that Victoria couldn't see or hear me. When we first moved in, my counter-surveillance training kicked in. It took me 2 weeks to find all of Victoria's devices. They were sophisticated, paper-thin microphones behind the drywall, pinhole fiber optic cameras in the smoke detectors and air vents. A normal person would have been terrified. I was just disappointed in her tradecraft. I didn't remove the bugs. Amateurs remove bugs. Professionals feed them. Using a signal repeater and a simple audio looper, I created a fake data loop for the closet. For the last 4.5 years, anyone monitoring the feed from my closet saw and heard the same 10-minute recording. Me humming, zipping a dress, and spraying perfume. I shut the heavy oak door. I was finally alone. I walked past the rows of designer clothes, the armor Victoria bought for me, to the back wall. Behind a false panel holding my shoe collection, I pressed a hidden release. The panel clicked open, revealing a small biometric safe. My fingerprint unlocked it. Inside was my real arsenal. Encrypted hard drives, a secure air-gapped laptop, 3 burner phones, fully charged. This wasn't a closet, this was my forward operating base. I sat on the floor, my back against the panel, and let out the one breath I'd been holding all morning. The tension in my chest eased, but only slightly. My public phone vibrated in my robe pocket. I looked at it. A text from Victoria. Darling, the blue Valentino, please. It presents such a united front. A velvet-wrapped order. A threat disguised as a suggestion. A united front meant her front. It meant I was to stand by her asset and look supportive, docile, and grateful. I picked up my public phone and texted her back. Of course, Mother, I can't wait. I put the phone down. I stood up, calm, and walked to the other side of the closet. I pushed past the blues, the blacks, the safe, boring colors Victoria approved of. I stopped at a garment bag at the very end. I unzipped it. Inside, a dress hung waiting. It was a Dior. And it was red. Not just red. It was a deep, visceral, blood red. The red of an attack guidon leading a charge. The red of arterial spray. Tonight was not about a united front. Tonight was not about survival. I laid the red dress out on the ottoman. Tonight was about attack. A surprise attack, launched from within, precisely calculated, and 5 years in the making. That blood-red Dior. It hung there, waiting. A symbol of an ending. It made me think of the dress that was supposed to be my beginning, the white one. I didn't marry James for his money or his name. I wasn't one of Victoria's debutante girls, as she so often reminded me. I was a self-made woman, an army brat who got herself into West Point on pure merit and graduated at the top of her JAG class. I had my own career, my own mission. Then I met James. It was 6 years ago, at a military charity gala. One of those stuffy Washington, D.C. events I was required to attend. I was standing alone, bored, studying the legal loopholes in the charity's donor agreements when he walked up. He wasn't like the other heirs I'd met. They were all smooth surfaces and empty handshakes. James was warm. He had this slightly rebellious spark in his eyes. He bypassed the generals and the senators and came right to me. He actually listened when I talked about military jurisprudence. He found it fascinating. "You're all about discipline, aren't you, Major?" he'd said, smiling. I admire that. God knows I don't have a shred of it. He was right. He had a chaotic, free energy that I, as a woman built on structure, had never allowed myself to have. I loved his freedom. And he said, loved my strength. Our love was real. I know it was. At least, it was in the beginning. Our wedding was a masterpiece of Victoria's power, a sprawling, obscenely expensive affair at a historic Virginia estate. Every detail was curated, not for us, but for Forbes magazine. Victoria herself was magnificent in a custom gown. But her eyes, when they looked at me, were as cold as the ice sculptures. I remember standing at the reception, my hand in James's. It was time to cut the cake, a 7-foot-tall monster. James picked up the silver knife, and for a second, he hesitated. He looked at me and gave me that real, rebellious smile, as if he was about to smash the cake in my face. I saw Victoria move. She glided up to him, a vision of the perfect matriarch. She put her arms around him from behind, a loving embrace for the cameras, and she whispered something in his ear. I watched it happen. I watched the man I loved disappear. His smile vanished. His shoulders straightened. His grip on the knife became rigid. He turned from me, faced the cake, and executed a perfect, precise, sterile cut. The crowd applauded. Victoria smiled, triumphant. I just stood there. A chill ran straight down my spine, right through the silk of my wedding dress. It was the first time I'd seen it. The first time I realized the man I married wasn't always the one in control. It was the first time I saw the puppet. That night, in the presidential suite, Victoria gave her welcome toast. She raised her glass. Welcome to the clan, Major, she'd said, her voice dripping with condescension. We do hope your pristine military background is clean enough to shield James from himself. James just laughed, a hollow sound. Mom's just kidding, honey. She's just protecting the brand. But she wasn't kidding, and I wasn't, honey. I was the shield. I was so naive. I thought love could fix it. I thought my strength could protect his freedom. For the first year, I tried. I really tried. I became the perfect JAG lawyer by day and the perfect Harrington wife by night. I hosted dinners. I schmoozed with corrupt defense contractors. I smiled as Victoria constantly compared me to the other women James could have married. Women who, as she put it, knew their place and weren't so stubborn like a military mule. I endured it all because I still saw glimpses of the real James. In the middle of the night, he'd wake up from a nightmare and hold on to me, whispering how he felt like he was drowning. Then came our first anniversary. Victoria summoned us to her office. It wasn't a room, it was a fortress. Dark oak walls, floor-to-ceiling shelves of unread leather-bound books, a desk the size of a car. Pure, old-money American power. A gift for you, darling, she said, sliding a small robin's egg blue Tiffany box across the desk. I was surprised. It was the first kind gesture she'd ever made. I opened it. Inside there was no diamond bracelet, no earrings. There was a pen, a single, heavy, black and gold Mont Blanc pen. A little something, Victoria said, her eyes gleaming. For signing the post-nuptial trust documents. Just a formality, of course. She pushed a thick stack of papers toward me. James just stood by the window, his back to me, looking out over the Virginia hills. I'm a lawyer. I read the fine print. It wasn't a formality. It was an execution. It was a 40-page document systematically stripping me of any and all rights. It wasn't a trust. It was a contract stating that in the event of a divorce, I would receive nothing. And, more importantly, I would be bound by a non-disclosure agreement so severe I could be jailed for telling the truth. I looked up from the paper, my blood running cold. Victoria, this is prudent, she snapped. I looked at James. James? He finally turned. His face was pale, his eyes distant. It's just paperwork, honey. Just sign it, for the family. It's a special kind of pain, isn't it? When the person who is supposed to love you most looks right through you. If you've ever felt like your love or your hard work was treated as just paperwork, support this story with a like and comment the word unseen below. I didn't sign it. That was the first time I openly defied her. The war began that day. The final straw, the moment my love died and my mission began, was 3 months later. I came home early from the Pentagon. The house was quiet. I found James in the media room, sitting in the dark, staring at the blank television screen. No, not blank. It was playing a video. It was just static in flashing geometric shapes and a monotone voice reading numbers. James was sitting perfectly still, his eyes wide, unblinking. He was in a trance. A file on the table next to him was labeled Dr. T. Whitley, Weekly Maintenance. I backed out of the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. That night, my operation began. I didn't cry. I got angry. I used my training. I swept my own house for bugs. I found them. I built my safe room. And I started digging. It took me 6 months to find the truth. Project Sentinel. It was all there in Victoria's hidden server. A systematic behavioral conditioning program she and Dr. Whitley had started on James when he was just a child, right after his real mother died. A program designed to protect the Harrington legacy from emotional weakness. They hadn't just influenced him, they had programmed him. I realized I hadn't married a man. I had married a project. And my pristine military background, it was just the new upgraded firewall they'd acquired to protect their most valuable asset. I stopped trying to save the man I loved. He was already gone. I started a new mission, to liberate the prisoner of war he'd left behind, and to burn his jailers to the ground. The moment I read the words, Project Sentinel, the wife in me died. The soldier took over. My mission parameters were set. The objective, total liberation. The timeline, 5 years. And so, my double life began. It became a rhythm, a precise, exhausting drill. By day, I was Major Willow Willis, JAG Corps. I'd drive my government-approved sedan to my office at the Pentagon, salute the flag, and spend my days navigating the complex, bureaucratic world of military procurement. The irony was almost suffocating. I was reviewing billion-dollar defense contracts for fraud, all while married to the king and queen of it. But I used my position. I studied their methods. I learned how Harrington Defense hid their money, how they moved assets, how they used shell corporations and subcontractor loopholes to make themselves invisible. I was using my security clearance to, in effect, build the case against my own family. Then, at 1800 hours, I'd drive back over the bridge from DC to Arlington. I'd swap my uniform for a Lululemon set, and I'd become the perfect, supportive wife. I'd be in the kitchen, searing a filet mignon. Medium rare, just how Victoria told James he liked it, when he'd walk in. I'd smile, I'd ask about his day at the office, a job I knew was just a title. He'd give his programmed one-sentence answers, and all the while, a tiny thumbnail-sized USB drive, disguised as a piece of jewelry on my keychain, would be plugged into his personal laptop on the kitchen counter, silently cloning his hard drive while he drank his single glass of scotch. It was this isolation that wore me down the most. Attending those lavish DC dinner parties, my hand resting on the arm of my empty husband. I had to smile and make small talk with senators I knew Victoria owned, with generals whose careers Harrington Defense had personally sponsored. I was smiling at the very people who were complicit in the corruption, laughing at their jokes while knowing my husband was being controlled in the next room, and that I was the only one who knew the truth. It was a crushing, lonely burden. But the soldier in me focused on the mission. My safe room, the closet, became my command center. Night after night, for 5 years, I pieced together their empire. My JAG training was invaluable. I followed the money. It led me to a shell corporation in Delaware, the most anonymous state in the Union, to hide a company. This company, Behavioral Performance Solutions, LLC, had one client, Harrington Defense. And it had one vendor it paid, Dr. Thomas Whitley. The payments were massive, $30,000 wired on the first of every month from an account in Zurich. The invoice memo was always the same. Ongoing behavioral performance consulting. This wasn't therapy, this was a maintenance fee for a puppet. But the real jackpot was the audio files. Buried deep on a backup server, I found recordings of Victoria's family board meetings. I listened, my blood turning to ice as they discussed me. They talked about the 5-year trust deadline. I heard Victoria's cold, clear voice discussing the risk of James's original personality re-emerging. We need to reinforce his conditioning, her voice said on a recording from 2 years ago. Increase Dr. Whitley's sessions. I will not have 5 years of work undone by an emotional relapse. Secure the asset. Then, we deal with the major. They weren't just waiting out the clock. They were planning a new offensive, and I was the target. I became more reckless. I needed more. I started digging into the corporate servers, not just James's laptop. That's when I almost got caught. It was a Tuesday morning. My phone rang. It was William, James's cousin, the Harrington family's chief counsel. A snake in a $5,000 suit. "Willow," he said, his voice slick with false charm. "Just checking in. I saw your network ID pinging our servers. Taking a special interest in the Zurich subcontracts, are we? Is the Pentagon investigating?" My heart stopped. He was baiting me. He knew. I let the silence hang for a beat. I forced my voice to go cold, not with fear, but with authority. The authority he gave me, but didn't respect. I became Major Willis. "That's right, William," I said. "We're conducting a full audit of all Tier 3 subcontractors. Standard procedure." "This seems aggressive," he pushed. "It is," I snapped. "I'm just making sure Harrington Defense is clean before the Pentagon rubber stamps your next Aegis contract. I'm protecting the family, just like I'm supposed to. I assume you have no problem with that. Mrs. Victoria wouldn't want any issues, would she?" The silence on his end was deafening. I had used Victoria's own power against him. "No," he finally said, his voice tight. "No issues at all." He hung up. I exhaled, my hands shaking. I had won the battle, but I knew I'd exposed my flank. The clock was ticking faster. The exhaustion set in around year 4. It was a physical weight. The loneliness of the long-haul operation, the constant vigilance, the mask was getting heavy. One night, I remember, I couldn't even go upstairs to the penthouse. I just sat in my car in the parking garage. A typical DC autumn rain was hammering against the concrete. I felt done. I wanted to throw the burner phones in the Potomac, get in my car, and just drive until I ran out of gas. I wanted to quit. I was 31 years old, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a real conversation. I was a ghost. I idly turned on my podcast app. It was set to Jocko Willink, the former Navy SEAL, the icon of American discipline. I'd been listening to him on my drives to the Pentagon. His deep, rumbling voice filled the car. He was reading a letter from a listener who said he was tired, worn out, and losing the fight. Jocko's reply was simple. "You tired? You sore? You beaten down? Good. That means you're in the fight. That means you're still pushing. Good." A single word. It hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't tired. I wasn't broken. I was in the fight. I wasn't enduring. I was training. The last 4 years hadn't been a prison. They'd been a crucible. They'd been forging me into the weapon this family had always feared I was. Discipline equals freedom. I took a deep, steadying breath. I put the car in park and shut off the engine. The rain hammered on. I wasn't a victim. I was a major in the U.S. Army. I got out of the car, my spine straight. I restarted my campaign. The Jocko podcast reset my clock. The mission was still active, but the parameters had to change. I had spent 5 years on defense, on endurance. But after William's phone call, I knew they were actively hunting me. My timeline had been accelerated. I couldn't just survive the 5-year mark, I had to win. And I couldn't do it alone. A soldier who goes on a mission without support is a fool. I had the evidence, terabytes of it, but I was a major. Victoria Harrington was a shadow general. She owned politicians. She had half the Pentagon on her payroll. If I went public, she would bury me, discredit me as a scorned wife, and the evidence would disappear into a black hole of national security. I couldn't go public. I had to go internal. I needed the one group Victoria couldn't buy, the one group she couldn't intimidate, the U.S. Army's Criminal Investigation Division, CID. I spent a week in my safe room, curating the perfect package. I couldn't send them the Project Sentinel files, not yet. They would dismiss it as a family dispute. I had to give them something they couldn't ignore. I compiled a 90-page file focused on one thing: contract fraud. I detailed the Zurich shell corporations, the illegal wire transfers, the kickbacks on the Aegis drone program. I laid out, in precise, legal, undeniable detail, how Harrington Defense was defrauding the U.S. government. I signed it, a concerned officer. I sent the encrypted package through an anonymous dead-drop server. I routed it to only one man, Special Agent Mark Spector Davison. I knew his reputation. Everyone at the Pentagon did. Spector was a ghost, a quiet 48-year-old widower who had spent his life in the shadows of military justice. His father had been a sergeant major. They said Mark Davison was the last true believer, a man who couldn't be bought, bribed, or bullied. 3 days later, I got a reply on my burner phone. A single message. Tomorrow, Euro 600, ANC, Arlington National Cemetery. It wasn't an office, it wasn't a coffee shop. It was a place of honor, a place where you couldn't lie. At dawn, the air was cold and sharp. I was in my full Class A uniform, the green service uniform. Mark was waiting for me just inside the gates, standing by the headstones of the service members from the most recent wars. He was a civilian, but he wore his suit like a uniform. He had a deep sadness in his eyes that I recognized, the look of a man who has seen too much. We didn't shake hands. He just nodded and started walking. I fell into step beside him. We walked in silence for 5 minutes, the only sound our polished shoes on the wet pavement and the distant sound of taps being played for a funeral. The rows of simple white headstones stretched out in perfect, disciplined lines. He finally spoke, his voice low. "Your package is impressive, Major, meticulous. You've got a slam-dunk case on the contract fraud." He stopped and turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "But it's incomplete. You didn't build this file because you're a concerned officer. You built it because you're pissed. This file is personal. It's missing the why." I stood there, at attention, in the most sacred ground in America. He was right. He was testing me, not as a lawyer, but as a person. And I knew, in that moment, I had to make a choice. Trust no one, or trust this one man. I took the gamble. Because they are doing to the U.S. government exactly what they are doing to my husband. His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. Victoria Harrington, my mother-in-law. She programs him. My husband, James. He is a victim. They are using psychological conditioning to control him, to protect their legacy. The man I married is a prisoner of war. And I am too. I said it. The whole truth. My voice didn't shake. It was the simple, cold, unvarnished truth. Mark stared at me. He looked away, out over the endless rows of the fallen. He seemed to be looking at one grave in particular. "My wife, she died of cancer 3 years ago," he said, his voice rough with an emotion I hadn't expected. "Her father was a hard man, a bully. Thought emotion was weakness. He ran his family like a boot camp." He paused. "For the last year of her life, she refused to see him. She said she'd rather die in peace than fight a war she couldn't win." He turned back to me, and the sadness in his eyes was replaced with a cold, hard fire. "In the Army, we have a saying, Major. I've got your 6. It means I'm watching your back." He took a step closer. "Major Willis, what they are doing to you, that is not family. That's a crime. Those people, your husband's family, they do not have your 6. He waited a beat. "But we do." I don't know how to describe that feeling. For 5 years, I had been utterly, completely alone. I was the only soldier in a one-woman war. And in that moment, on that sacred ground, a stranger, a good man, had just shown up as my reinforcements. I felt the prickle of tears, the first in 5 years. I blinked them back. "What's next, Agent Davison?" "What's next," he said, "is you keep your head down. We will take this fraud case and rip them apart from the outside. You just survive." But Victoria was already moving. A week later, I got a priority alert from my JAG superior. My security clearance, my career, was under a surprise review. An anonymous tip had been filed, suggesting I was a security risk due to unstable personal associations. It was Victoria's classic move, a preemptive strike. She was trying to get me disbarred, dishonorably discharged. She was trying to destroy my credibility before I could use it. I was panicked. I texted Mark, code red. The next day, the review was canceled. My superior was baffled. False alarm, Major, he said. CID stepped in, said the tip was malicious and unfounded. Weird. You must have an angel on your shoulder. I got a one-word text from Mark. Blocked. He followed up with another coded message. She spooked. The 5-year clock is making her nervous. She knows the asset is about to expire. She's not just protecting her flank, she's setting a trap. I looked at the message, and I understood. The birthday party, my 32nd birthday. The 5-year anniversary. It wasn't just my D-Day, it was Victoria's too. She was planning to deal with the Major that night. The game was on. The elevator doors opened and the battle began. We were at the Apex, a glass-walled restaurant on a DC rooftop, the kind of place where laws are rewritten over $50 cocktails. The view was staggering, looking straight out over the illuminated spike of the Washington Monument, a monument to freedom, hosting my execution. The room was staged perfectly. Massive sprays of white orchids, crystal chandeliers. It was suffocating. James was silent beside me, his hand on my back, a rigid, cold weight. He was tense, but it wasn't a human tension. It was the tension of a machine wound too tight. Victoria glided toward us. She was wearing a severe navy blue Chanel suit, the armor of the DC matriarch. She didn't walk, she advanced. She pulled me into a dry, papery hug, her perfume choking me. Willow, darling, she whispered, her lips brushing my ear, her voice a cold hiss meant only for me. Red. How? Bold. She pulled back, her eyes flicking over the Dior. The Valentino, the blue one. It would have shown more unity. I gave her my pre-planned, camera-ready smile. I just wanted to stage a surprise attack, Victoria. Her own smile thinned. She knew I wasn't just talking about the dress. She turned and put her hand on James's arm, a gesture that looked like affection, but was one of command. James, darling, be a good husband and get your wife some champagne. He nodded, a jerky, puppet-like motion, and moved toward the bar. My eyes scanned the room. This was it. The moment I'd been training for. I began my threat assessment. The entire DC power structure was here, the Beltway elite, in the flesh. I saw 2 4-star generals I knew were on the Harrington payroll. I saw Senator Klein, whose entire re-election campaign was funded by Victoria. I saw lobbyists, defense contractors, and their wives, all dripping in diamonds, all laughing too loudly. Every person here was an ally of the Harrington Empire. And then the cold, hard realization hit me. I looked for a friendly face, a lifeline. There was no one. Not one colleague from my JAG office. Not a single friend from my West Point class. Not even my old roommate from basic training who lived 20 minutes away in Alexandria. This wasn't a party. It was a courtroom. It was a trap, sealed and hermetically clean. Victoria hadn't just curated a guest list. She had sanitized the stage. She had removed every possible character witness who could speak on my behalf. I was utterly, completely, and strategically alone. Willow, happy birthday! A voice, slick as oil, slimed its way into my ear. It was William, the family's legal counsel, the snake. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne, and right behind him was the architect himself, Dr. Thomas Whitley, the puppet master. A word, doctor? William said, nodding to Whitley as he handed me a glass. I didn't take it. They thought I was out of earshot. They stepped near a jazz trio that was playing, using the music for cover. I was trained in counter-surveillance. I know how to read lips, and I know how to move. I drifted closer, pretending to admire the view. Unstable, Whitley was murmuring, his back to me. I warned you, William. Accelerating the protocol this fast risks destabilizing the asset completely. He just needs to last the night, William hissed. After tonight, she's gone. Victoria has the... Gentlemen, They both spun around. I was standing right there, my smile frozen in place. William recovered first, his politician's smile snapping back. Willow, just telling the good doctor here how lucky James is to have him. Dr. Whitley, however, looked pale. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. I looked straight at him, my voice light, conversational, but loud enough for the people nearby to hear. Oh, I agree. Dr. Whitley, I've always wanted to ask about your intensive coaching methods. You're a miracle worker. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. How do you do it? How do you get James to be so wonderfully efficient? His smile was a rigid, terrified grimace. He knew in that second that I knew everything. He saw the predator he'd helped create. Before he could answer, a sharp ting 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 cut through the air. Victoria was standing by the microphone, tapping her champagne glass. The room fell silent. Thank you all for coming, she said, her voice amplified, resonating with power. She was in her element, the queen on her throne. We are here to celebrate my wonderful daughter-in-law, Major Willow Willis. Her eyes found me, a spotlight pinning me in place. Willow has been a rock, she continued. So loyal, so discreet. In her 5 years with our family, she has shown such a profound commitment to our legacy. It was a speech, but it was also a warning, a message to everyone in the room. She is ours. She is under control. It was a performance of ownership. I felt sick. I looked over at James. He was standing near the stage, his expression blank. My last, stupid, fragile piece of hope flickered. Come on, James. The real James. Be in there. See what she's doing. See me. But he wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at his mother. He was staring at the table in front of him, and his fingers. His fingers were tapping. Tap, 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 tap. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't a nervous tick. It was a pattern, a rhythm. I knew that rhythm. I'd heard it on the training videos. It was a mnemonic device, a self-calming anchor that Whitley had programmed into him. It was the signal, the trigger. He wasn't just nervous. He was executing a command. Victoria raised her glass, her eyes locked on me. So let's all raise a glass, she boomed. To Willow. And to her, transformative 32nd year. It was a threat. I looked from her, the general, to James, the weapon. And I realized their plan, the one they'd been whispering about, was in motion. The trap was about to spring. Victoria's smile was a triumphant slash as the applause died down. And now, she announced, the gifts. The jazz trio softened. A silver cart was wheeled out by a waiter. Victoria, the general, stayed put. She was commanding this from the stage. James, she called out, her voice dripping with maternal pride. Your gift first. James, still standing near her, moved toward the cart. He picked up a long dark blue box. He walked toward me. He moved like he was wading through water, his motions stiff and delayed. He wasn't walking, he was being moved. He stood in front of me, not meeting my eyes. He opened the box. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a tennis bracelet. It wasn't just a bracelet. It was a wall of diamonds, heavy, ostentatious, and blinding. It was worth more than my next 3 years of military pay. It's beautiful, I said, my voice practiced. My smile felt like a crack in a dam. He just stared at the box. Victoria's voice cut through the air again, impatient. Well, put it on her, son. What are you waiting for? James flinched. He fumbled with the bracelet. His fingers, the fingers I once held, were cold and clumsy. He grabbed my left wrist. His touch was like cold metal. He fumbled with the clasp, his knuckles brushing my skin. It felt like being touched by a stranger. Snap. The clasp clicked shut. It was heavy on my arm. A beautiful handcuff, I thought, the words echoing in my head. I forced my smile wider for the cameras I knew were watching. The performance had to continue. James just stood there, his hand still hovering near my arm. Now, Victoria's voice boomed. For a special announcement. She glided off the stage, moving toward James and me. The room was absolutely silent, watching her. This was the moment, the transformative part of the evening. She reached us. She didn't look at me. She only had eyes for her son, her creation. We are so proud, she said, her voice now softer, but it carried. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on James's shoulder. I watched, my heart hammering. This was it. Her fingers didn't just rest on his shoulder, they dug in. Her thumb pressed hard into a spot just below his collarbone, a nerve center. It was a practiced, deliberate pressure. It wasn't a touch of love, it was an activation. I saw the change in him instantly. A shiver went through his body. Victoria, I said, my voice low, a warning. She ignored me. She leaned in, her lips almost touching James's ear. She spoke, and in the dead silence of the rooftop, everyone heard her. You've been so loyal, Willow, she said, her eyes now locked on me, cold and victorious. So supportive, especially. For these last 5 important years. She stressed the words. It was a signal. The contract was complete. And then she turned her lips back to James's ear. A whisper, but a whisper I was trained to hear. A whisper I felt in my bones. Remember your mission, son, she hissed. Protect our asset. Asset, not our family, not our honor. Asset. I had my hand on my clutch, my finger on the audio recorder of my burner phone, which was already active. I had been recording since her speech began. I watched James. It was like watching a switch being thrown. His entire body went rigid. The fog in his eyes vanished, replaced by a terrifying, flat, reptilian focus. His pupils. They constricted. He turned his head toward me, slowly, mechanically. The man I married was gone. This was the sentinel. He spoke. His voice was not his own. It was a perfect, flat, emotionless monotone. You betrayed us. The entire room gasped. I could hear the sharp intake of 50 people. Victoria stepped back, a single, perfect step. Her face was a mask of satisfied, shocked concern. The director watching her play unfold. What? I said, my voice steady. We know, James continued in that same dead voice. We know about your investigation. Another gasp from the crowd. I saw William and Dr. Whitley standing together, watching. They were the stagehands. We know about the files, James said. He was accusing me. He was painting me as the villain. The unstable, traitorous wife. This was her plan. This was the trap. This was how she would deal with the major. And then, his arm swung. It moved so fast. Not with the sloppy anger of a human, but with the high-velocity, programmed precision of a machine. Thwack. The sound. It was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was sharp, wet, and final. It echoed across the rooftop, silencing the jazz music, silencing the DC night. His open palm connected with the side of my face. The force of it snapped my head back. The world exploded in white light and pain. I was airborne for a second. I crashed backward into the champagne table. The sound of shattering glass, of a Dom Pérignon flute breaking. I hit the marble floor, hard. I landed on my side, my legs tangled in the tablecloth. The red Dior dress, now soaked with spilled champagne. My ears were ringing. The pain was a dull roar. But I could feel something else, something warm. I put my hand to my mouth. I tasted it. Salt and copper. Blood. The room was absolutely, completely, dead silent. I lay there, on the floor, for what felt like a lifetime. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. And in that silence, I heard a new sound. Dozens of them. Click, 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 click. I looked up from the floor, every single person in the room. The generals, the senators, the lobbyists, their wives. Every single one of them had their phone out. And they were all recording me, If you have ever been the one on the floor, the one everyone is staring at, hit that like button to show Willow your support. And if you've ever felt that kind of betrayal, comment with one word: silence. The silence was absolute. $100 million rooftop, 50 of the most powerful people in Washington, D.C. And the only sound was the distant city hum and the click, click, click of phones capturing my humiliation. I was on the floor. My cheek was on fire. The taste of blood and Dom Perignon was sharp in my mouth. And in that dead, agonizing silence, I started to laugh. It began as a chuckle, a small private sound from my chest. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated adrenaline, a laugh of realization. Victoria's face, which had been a mask of perfect, concerned horror for her audience, froze. This was not in her script. The victim is supposed to cry. The victim is supposed to be broken. My chuckle grew, bubbling up, echoing in the stunned silence. I pushed myself up to a sitting position. The red Dior dress was torn at the hip, soaked. I didn't care. I looked straight at Victoria, and I laughed. A full, clear, controlled laugh. Victoria's eyes narrowed, the mask slipped. She knew she had just made a fatal, tactical error. As I sat there on the floor, a quote flashed in my mind, a line we'd studied at West Point from Psalm 144. Blessed be the Lord my strength, which teacheth my hands to war, and my fingers to battle. Victoria thought she was fighting a wife. She had forgotten she was fighting a soldier. Oh, Victoria, I said, my voice ringing out, clear and strong. I got to my feet. I didn't accept a single helping hand. I stood tall in my ruined dress, and I slowly, deliberately, wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand. I looked at her, and my smile was all teeth. That was perfect, I said, my voice resonating with 5 years of suppressed power. Absolutely perfect. You couldn't have planned a better psychological operation if you tried. The crowd was frozen. Their phones were still up, but the hands holding them were trembling. I turned, addressing the room as if they were my jury. Which they were. When I was at West Point, they taught us about psychops, the art of war. The first rule is to know your enemy. The second is to never, ever underestimate them. I pointed at Victoria. She wanted you to see me as an unstable, emotional, traitorous wife. I then pointed to my bleeding lip. She wanted to create a public spectacle to discredit me. I turned my gaze to the crowd. And ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed a flawless performance. I paused, letting the words hang. But you have also just become material witnesses to an aggravated assault, recorded on at least 50 devices. The sea of phones didn't lower, but the confidence behind them vanished. The generals, the senators, they suddenly looked like what they were, co-conspirators. What? What are you talking about? Victoria hissed, her voice losing its powerful resonance. It was thin. I'm talking about your plan, Victoria, I said, taking a step toward her. Your plan to paint me as the villain, to have James publicly condemn me, and then, I assume, have me committed? Get my security clearance revoked? Have me dishonorably discharged? Her face was white. It was a good plan, I said, nodding, as if complimenting a rival officer. But you made one mistake. I looked over at James. He was frozen. The misfire that Whitley had worried about was happening. The programming was glitching. He was staring at his own hand, the one he'd hit me with, as if it was a foreign object. His face was a mask of pure, childlike horror. I, he whispered, so low only I could hear. What did I do? The program was broken. The real James was looking out, horrified at what the Sentinel had done. I looked back at the crowd. My voice softened, but lost none of its command. You see, you are witnesses to an assault. But the man who hit me, I said, gesturing to James, is not the perpetrator. I looked at him, and for the first time in 5 years, I spoke to him, the man I'd married. He's a victim, just like me. I turned my full attention, my full, unleashed fury, back to Victoria. You calculated everything, Victoria. The 5-year mark, the party, the guests, the public humiliation. You planned for everything. I reached into my clutch. I pulled out my burner phone. It was still recording. Except for this. I held it up. You see, as a JAG officer, I'm a bit of a stickler for procedure. And as a soldier, I'm a big believer in contingencies. You thought this was my trap? My little plan? Victoria scoffed, trying to regain control. No, Victoria, I said. I never had a plan to expose you tonight. My plan was to survive you. My plan was a dead man's switch. I held up the phone. This is a simple app, a crash detection app, the kind runners use if the phone experiences a sudden, high G-force impact. I gestured to the floor, like, say, being violently knocked to the ground. I watched Victoria's eyes. They were no longer angry. They were, for the first time, terrified. The moment I hit that marble floor, it triggered a safety protocol I designed 5 years ago. A protocol that assumes I am dead, or incapacitated, or, as it turns in this case, publicly assaulted. What? What are you babbling about? William stammered, stepping forward. I'm babbling about 1.8 terabytes of data, William, I said, my voice like ice. My entire 5-year intelligence package, every email, every shell corporation in Delaware and Zurich, every illegal wire transfer, every single recording of you and Dr. Whitley discussing Project Sentinel and the conditioning of James. Every piece of evidence of contract fraud, bribery, and psychological abuse. You're lying, Victoria shrieked. Am I? I said. I checked my watch. 90 seconds ago, that entire 1.8 terabyte package was simultaneously and automatically delivered to 3 organizations you can't control. 1. My new friends at CID, specifically Special Agent Mark Davison. 2. The Washington Field Office of the FBI, Cybercrimes Division. And 3. Because I believe in transparency. The top 10 largest media outlets in the world, including the Washington Post and the New York Times. A phone buzzed. A single phone in the dead silence. A guest, a lobbyist, looked down at his phone. His face went pale. Then another phone buzzed, and another. A cacophony of dings, chimes, and vibrations swept across the room. It was an electronic plague. BZZT, BZZT, ding. The guests were all staring at their screens, their faces illuminated in the blue light, their expressions turning from shock to utter panic. The first headline had just dropped. The lobbyist next to Victoria read it aloud, his voice trembling. Breaking news. Harrington Defense, CEO Victoria Harrington, under investigation for massive Pentagon contract fraud. FBI raids reportedly imminent. The wave of alerts was a digital tidal wave washing over the rooftop. BZZT, BZZT, ding. Panic. It was immediate. The polite predatory smiles of the DC elite vanished, replaced with the raw animal fear of rats in a trap. What is this? Is this real? A senator's wife stammered. My God, Senator Klein himself whispered, staring at his phone, his face the color of ash. The Post, the Times, they all have it. The allies, the ones who had been laughing with Victoria minutes before, began to instinctively, physically, move away from her. They created a circle of open space, a quarantine zone around the Harrington family. Victoria was trembling, her face a grotesque mask of fury and disbelief. Lies! She shrieked, her voice cracking. These are all lies, slander. I will sue every one of you. She spun, her eyes wild, and pointed a trembling finger at me. You bitch! You did this! No, Victoria, I said, my voice cutting through her panic like a razor. You did. And right at that moment, on cue, ding! The sound of the private elevator. Every head on the rooftop snapped toward the doors. The music had stopped. The only sound was the frantic buzzing of phones and Victoria's ragged breathing. The brushed steel doors slid open. 3 men stood there, all in dark, identical government-issue suits. But the man in the lead was not in a suit. He wore his Army CID windbreaker, and his face was carved from granite. Special Agent Mark Spectre Davison. He stepped out onto the rooftop, his eyes scanning the scene. The shattered glass, the blood on my lip, the panicked crowd, and finally, me. He gave me a single, barely perceptible nod. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mark announced, his voice the calm, authoritative boom of a man who cannot be bought. "This is now an active federal crime scene. No one leaves." "What is the meaning of this?" Victoria finally roared, finding her footing. This, she understood, a show of force. She stepped forward, trying to muster her authority. "Agent Davison, is it? Do you have any idea who I am?" It was the classic, pathetic defense of the DC powerful. Mark didn't blink. He took a step toward her, his gaze unwavering, and he delivered the line that shattered her world. "Yes, ma'am, we know exactly who you are." He nodded to the 2 FBI agents behind him. "That's why we're here." He held up a small badge. "Victoria Harrington, you are under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States government, multiple counts of wire fraud, and bribery of a public official." "This is insane. You have no proof," she screamed as the 2 agents moved past her, their hands reaching for handcuffs. "We do, ma'am," Mark said, his voice flat. "We just received a 1.8 terabyte package of it from Major Willis." The blood drained from her face. As the agents cuffed her, the rooftop dissolved into pure chaos. The allies were shoving each other, trying to get to the elevator, only to be stopped by 2 more agents who had emerged. "I didn't know," Senator Klein was yelling. "I was never involved." Amid the chaos, I stood perfectly still. I had not moved. This was my battlefield, and I was in command. I saw Dr. Whitley. He was trying to melt into the background, edging his way toward a decorative potted plant, his face dripping with sweat. I pointed at him. My voice was loud and clear. "Agent Davison, him too." Mark's eyes snapped to Whitley. "Dr. Thomas Whitley," I announced, my voice like a prosecutor's. "I'm accusing him of conspiracy to commit aggravated assault, practicing medicine without a license, and the psychological torture and coercive conditioning of a United States citizen." Whitley let out a small, strangled cry. "It was a program, wasn't it, doctor?" I said, walking toward him as he cowered. "You called it Project Sentinel, right? $30,000 a month, wired from a shell corporation in Zurich just to maintain your asset?" I was only trying to help," he stammered, his eyes darting around. "You're a monster," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "And you're done." "Get him," Mark ordered. An agent grabbed Whitley, who didn't even fight. He just deflated. He literally sagged, his knees buckling, and he collapsed into a patio chair, a weeping, pathetic mess. One down. Then, my eyes found William. He was standing near James, trying to look invisible, his lawyer's brain spinning, trying to calculate his next move. I walked over to him. "Cousin William," I said, my voice almost friendly. He looked at me, his eyes filled with pure hatred. "You've destroyed this family." "No, William, you just sold it for parts," I said. "Let's talk about the Aegis drone contract, the one from last March." His mask of calm cracked. He visibly paled. "Insider trading is a nasty charge," I continued, ticking off points on my fingers. "But when you do it by leaking classified weapons data to a non-NATO-approved subcontractor in Turkey, well, that's not just insider trading. That's a little closer to treason." You have no proof," he whispered. "I have the audio file of your call, William. The one you made from your supposedly secure office line. I have the wire transfer receipts from Istanbul." I leaned in. "You're the family lawyer. You know the drill. You're the first one they're going to pressure. You should start thinking about a plea deal. Now." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, a fish drowning on air. And then, a sound cut through all of it. "What have you done?" It was Victoria. She was in handcuffs, but she was fighting, a lioness in her death throes. She was screaming, not at me, not at the FBI, but at her son, at James. He was standing alone, in the center of the chaos, staring at his mother, the cuffs on her wrists. The programming was shattered, and he was just lost. James, you were supposed to stop her. You were supposed to be strong, Victoria shrieked, her voice raw with a despair that had nothing to do with the FBI and everything to do with her failed project. I built this for you. I gave you structure. James looked at her, and for the first time in 5 years, the fog was completely gone. The real man was there, and he was broken. He asked her a question, a simple, quiet question that cut me deeper than the slap. Why? He whispered, his voice trembling. Just, why? What? What am I to you? He wasn't asking as a husband, he was asking as a son. Victoria stopped struggling. She stared at her son, her creation. And in that moment, in her desperation, her mask of the cold, calculating CEO dissolved. And the true, terrified, monstrous tyrant was revealed. She lost all control. What are you? She jailed, her voice a guttural scream that echoed across the DC skyline. You're weak. You were always weak, just like him. She was spitting, her face contorted in pure, unfiltered rage. It needed structure. It needed to be controlled. The Harrington legacy had to be protected from its own weakness. The confession. The entire rooftop froze. The FBI agents, the cowering guests, William, Whitley, everyone. They all heard it. The final admission. She hadn't been protecting her son. She had been protecting the legacy from her son. He was never the heir. He was the flaw. James just broke. A sound, a sob tore from his chest. I looked at Mark. He nodded. Justice, finally, had been served. Victoria's final, monstrous confession hung in the air, thick and toxic, poisoning the rooftop more effectively than any nerve gas. Her shriek, it needed structure, echoed and then died, leaving a vacuum of pure, horrified silence. The spell wasn't just broken, it was annihilated. And in that vacuum, the rats began to scramble. I want to cooperate, a voice stammered. It was Dr. Whitley. He was still sitting in the patio chair, but he was already trying to save himself. She forced me. She threatened my license, the Sentinel project. It was all her design. I have notes. I can testify. You liar! William Harrington spat, his lawyer's brain kicking back in, seeing the first mover advantage for a plea deal. You were the architect. You bragged about it. Agents, he said, turning to the FBI. I am the family's legal counsel, and I am formally stating that Dr. Whitley's methods were unorthodox and performed without full corporate consent. I was just investigating him myself. It was disgusting. The Great Harrington Alliance, the bond of elite criminals, dissolved in less than 30 seconds. They were flipping on each other before the elevator doors had even closed. The other guests, the senators and lobbyists, were a different kind of animal. They weren't scrambling, they were fading. They tried to just disappear, to blend into the shadows, to slip out the emergency stairs. But Mark had been prepared. No one leaves, he'd ordered. And now the rest of the FBI team was moving, not with aggression, but with cold, bureaucratic efficiency. Sir, we'll need your statement. Ma'am, please wait over by the bar. Your phone, sir. We'll need to secure all video evidence of the assault. The party was over. The great and powerful were reduced to witnesses, trapped, their faces pale in the flashing red and blue lights that had just begun to reflect off the building's glass facade from the street below. I watched the chaos. The adrenaline was gone, draining out of me so fast my knees felt weak. It left behind a vast, cold emptiness. I felt exhausted. Like I had been holding my breath for 5 years and had just, finally, exhaled. My head throbbed where I'd been hit. My lip was swelling. My dress was ruined. I had won. But I had never felt less like a winner. My eyes found him. In the middle of the chaos, James was on the floor. He hadn't been arrested. He wasn't a rat. He was just gone. He was sitting on the marble, his back against a wet, broken patio table, his arms wrapped around his head, rocking back and forth. He was whispering. He was muttering things, fragments of memories like a broken radio picking up lost signals. The boat, Lake Anne. She said it was too slow. Don't be slow, James. My dog Buster, he got sick. She said he was defective. Defective? His voice was thin, reedy. It was the voice of a 10-year-old boy. The conditioning, the Sentinel program, had been shattered by the night's trauma. But what was left underneath wasn't the man I'd married. It was the broken child he'd been built on top of. My heart ached, not with love, not anymore, but with a profound, soul-crushing pity. He was the primary victim. He was just the first. I walked through the chaos. An FBI agent tried to stop me. "Ma'am, we need your—" Mark put a hand on his arm. "Let her go. She's the victim and the lead witness." I stopped in front of James. I didn't sit. I didn't kneel. I kept my distance, a few feet. He looked up at me. His eyes, the blue eyes that I had fallen in love with 6 years ago, they were clear. They were finally, terribly clear. And they were filled with an ocean of agony. "Willow," he whispered, his real voice, the one I hadn't heard in years. "Willow, I hit you." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of dawning, unbearable horror. I hurt you," he said, his voice cracking. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with the champagne on his cheeks. "Oh God, Willow. What she made me. I'm so sorry." He reached a trembling hand out to me. Not to hold me, just a plea. This was the moment. The most dangerous moment of all. The moment the victim I loved was asking for help. The moment my heart, the woman I used to be, wanted to forgive him, to hold him, to tell him it would be okay. But the soldier knew better. I did not take his hand. I stayed standing, just out of his reach, a boundary. My voice was gentle, but it was firm. It was not the voice of his wife. "Yes," I said. "You did." His face crumpled. "The man I met, the one at the charity event," I said, my voice quiet. "The one who loved talking about obscure history and hated his own lack of discipline." A small broken laugh escaped him. "I remember him," he whispered. "He was real," I said. "What we had, the beginning, that was real. I saw the signs of him trying to get out, before they reinforced the program." He looked up, desperate. "Willow, what now? What happens to me? What do I do?" I looked at this broken man, the shell of my husband, and I made my choice. "Now, you begin your journey, James," I said. "You start the fight, the real one." I can't," he whispered. She's everything. She's in my head." "I know," I said, "and I can help you. I have all the files. I have Dr. Whitley's notes. I know what he did to you, what triggers he installed, what memories he suppressed. I can help you deprogram." Hope flashed in his eyes. You will?" "Yes," I said. I took a single, deliberate step back. "I will help you. As Major Willis of the U.S. Army JAG Corps, I will testify on your behalf. I will give your lawyers all the evidence they need to classify you as a victim of long-term coercive control. I will help you as an officer, but not as your wife. That is over." The word wife hung in the air between us, and we both knew it was the end. He understood. He finally, painfully, understood. He just nodded, covering his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking in silent sobs. I had won. I had lost. I had survived. I turned around. The adrenaline was completely gone now. I just felt heavy. Mark Davison was standing by the elevator. The chaos was dying down. Victoria was gone. William and Whitley were gone. The guests were being processed one by one. He looked at me, his face grim, but his eyes kind. He saw the ruined dress, the bloody lip, the exhaustion. "You did good, Major," he said, his voice low. "A perfect operation. Flawless execution." I just nodded. I was too tired to speak. Just, just doing my duty, Agent, I whispered. Go home, Major, he said. Or, somewhere safe. We'll be in touch. I walked toward the elevator, the same one I had arrived in my red dress, ready for war. It felt like a lifetime ago. I stepped inside. The doors slid shut, sealing me in. And as the elevator began its smooth, silent descent, I was finally, completely, alone. I left the penthouse, the flashing lights, the broken champagne glasses, and the entire smoldering wreck of the Harrington dynasty behind me. 6 months. 6 months after I stepped out of that elevator, leaving the war zone of the penthouse behind. The silence that followed was deafening at first, filled with legal depositions, headlines, and the slow, grinding work of untangling an empire built on lies. The adrenaline was gone, the exhaustion was real. But for the first time in 5 years, the air in my lungs felt clean. The scene shift was dramatic. I had left the flashing red and blue lights of the raid, and now I was sitting in the sterile, fluorescent light of a federal courtroom. It was the final day. Judgment Day. I watched Victoria Harrington. The glamour was gone. That was an understatement. She was diminished. The Chanel armor was gone, replaced by a standard-issue beige jumpsuit. Her perfectly coiffed hair was dull, her natural gray roots showing. She looked every bit her 60 years, and she looked small. She had fought, of course. Her remaining lawyers tried every trick, painting her as a tough businesswoman in a man's world, a mother protecting her legacy. It didn't work. The 1.8 terabytes of data were irrefutable. The judge's voice was flat, unimpressed by the legacy of the Harrington name. On the charge of conspiracy to defraud the United States government, on 28 counts of wire fraud, on the charge of bribery, this court finds you, Victoria Harrington, guilty. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a final, heavy stillness. Her sentence came down like a gavel on a coffin, 28 years in a federal penitentiary, with no possibility of parole. A life sentence. The allies, of course, had scattered like the rats they were. The moment the FBI had them, William and Dr. Whitley had cooperated so fast they were tripping over each other to offer testimony. They turned on Victoria, on each other, on everyone to save themselves. It worked to an extent. Dr. Whitley, for his Project Sentinel and psychological torture, received 7 years. His medical license permanently revoked. William, for his insider trading and conspiracy, got 5. The Harrington defense empire was seized by the government. Its assets were liquidated to pay hundreds of millions in fines and restitution. The legacy Victoria had killed for was wiped out in a single morning. The battle was, finally, over. I left the courtroom alone. I stepped out of the heavy wooden doors and into the bright DC sunlight. The noise of the press was instant. Flashes, microphones, shouted questions. Major Willis! Major Willis! I ignored them, my eyes searching. He was there, standing across the plaza, near the steps, just waiting. James. He was thinner, and his eyes, once foggy with conditioning, were clear again. He looked like he'd been through his own personal war, and he had. He was in intense daily therapy, deprogramming from a lifetime of coercive control. I walked over to him. The press held their distance, sensing this was a different, more private moment. Willow, he said. His voice was quiet, but it was his own. James, I replied. I heard the sentencing, he said. I was there, I said. It's done. He nodded, looking down at his hands. She still tried to send me a message through her lawyer last week. An order. He looked up, his clear eyes meeting mine. I told the lawyer I told him where he could go. A small, sad smile touched my lips. Good. I wanted to thank you, Willow, he said, for testifying. For explaining that I was a victim, I finished for him. You were. You are. I'm trying not to be, he said, and I heard the strength in his voice for the first time. I'm in treatment. I am digging through a lot of rubble. Decades of it. He took a deep breath. Which is why I wanted to tell you. I've instructed my personal attorneys. What's left of my personal non-Harrington assets anyway? I'm transferring the entire amount to your new project. I was stunned. James, you don't have to do that. I know, he said. That's why I'm doing it. Willow. It was the first real autonomous decision I've ever made in my entire life. There it was, the real victory. Not the prison sentence for Victoria, but this, the first act of a free man. We stood there for a long moment. The love I'd felt for him was gone, evaporated by the trauma. But in its place was a profound, aching respect for the survivor standing in front of me. What now? I asked, just as he had asked me on the rooftop. Now, he said, I continue my journey. And you continue yours. He didn't try to hug me. He didn't ask for a second chance. He just gave me a small, respectful nod, the nod of one soldier to another. Goodbye, Willow, he said. Goodbye, James, I replied. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving me to face my own future. My future started a week later. I stood on the steps of the Pentagon in my full Class A uniform. The press was there again, but this time I had invited them. My wounds were healed, my hair was tied back in a tight regulation bun. I was not a victim. I was an officer. I was launching my nonprofit. I had taken the name. I had reclaimed it. Today, I said, my voice clear and strong, amplified by the microphones, we are launching the Sentinel Freedom Project. I told them my story. Not the bloody details, but the truth. That I was a survivor of extreme psychological abuse and coercive control. And that if it could happen to a major in the U.S. Army, it could happen to anyone. My new mission, my new legacy, was to provide legal aid, psychological support, and extraction services for those trapped in similar, silent war zones. I ended my speech with the words that had become my new creed. I told them about a speech I admired by a man who understood conflict, Theodore Roosevelt. President Roosevelt spoke famously of the man in the arena, I said, my voice ringing out over the plaza. He spoke of the man whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. But I am here to talk about another arena, a different kind of soldier. It is a silent battlefield, fought not in stadiums or on foreign soil, but in our own living rooms, in our kitchens, in our bedrooms. It is a war fought in the quiet, desperate spaces of our own homes. In this arena, I said, my voice thick with the memory, there is no crowd. There is no credit. There are no cheers for the winner. There is only silence. Today, I declared, we break that silence. We are not assets to be controlled. We are not property to be managed. We are not weak for feeling. We are the survivors. We are the warriors. We are the soldiers in our own arenas. And from this day forward, we will win. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my story. For 5 years, I fought my battle in silence, but sharing it with you all has been the final step in my healing. I know I'm not the only one who has had to face a silent arena. If this story touched you or reminded you of your own strength, please let me know in the comments. Just writing, I am a warrior, is enough to show your support. Your voices mean the world. And if you believe in the power of breaking the silence, please subscribe to this channel for more stories of survival and of finding your voice.